The Terrifying Lies Podcast, with music and stories by Craig Nybo.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Terrifying Lies Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Nybo. Welcome back to the show where we descend into the annals of terror and rise with stories untold. This season, we're veering into the cosmos with a science fiction adventure. And speaking of sci-fi, I've got a gem to recommend. Have you heard of Jeff Wayne's adaptation of War of the Worlds? This is one of my top 5 albums of all time, no question. If you love that deep 70s groove with a rock edge, this album's for you. Richard Burton leads the tale, taking us through H.G. Wells' legendary Martian invasion. And the music? Justin Hayward, Chris Thompson, David Essex, and Julie Covington, and more, all bringing it to life in the best way. If you haven't already, head to your streaming service and check it out. Right after you listen to this episode of Terrifying Lies. You won't regret it. Now, before we jump in, here's a heads up. This is part 3 of a 13-part saga. If you haven't heard parts 1 and 2, I'd suggest going back for those. Things might get confusing if you're just joining in. Previously on Rock and Roll and Resurrection, after witnessing her idol, Bieber, any similarity between the characters in this story and people in real life is strictly coincidental, lose his life in a car bomb, Twana Birch makes a pact with a mob boss, resurrecting him in exchange for a cut of his career's royalties. Her intention to help her mother, who suffers from dementia, to get into a healing and assisted living center. They're on a mission now, Bieber and Twana, aboard a space bus bound for the Pan-galactic Prom Show, the hottest gig in the known universe. And now, let's dive into part 3 of Rock and Roll and Resurrection.
The space hub crackled with anticipation. Families setting out on vacations beamed with excitement, preparing to embark on their first outer space getaways to the moon or beyond. Business people with off-planet ventures checked their timepieces and spoke to colleagues through sensory implant devices. Loved ones waited for returning friends, daughters, sons, and moms to come back from time away. Twana kept a close watch on her new companion as she made her way down the space terminal. Her companion wore a dark fedora and sunglasses. Disconcerted that Bieber couldn't grow a proper beard, her suggestion, she settled for a scarf. She dressed him in dumpy flannel, jeans, and cheap shoes. The real Bieber would never be seen wearing such atrocities. It saddened Twana to see him that way, but for her plan to succeed, she had to work incognito. Twana and Bieber boarded a glass elevator along with a throng of other people. Twana didn't notice the 2 men who just made the lift before the door slid shut. They wore suits, not lavish, not slouchy, just suits. The lift carried its passengers to the space bus pads. Twana watched the ground fall away through the glass floor below. She gasped at the speed of the elevator. She'd never been in such a pristine metropolitan place. She lived in the bunches, out of sight and out of the minds of those who had means to reside in the richer parts of the city. DePeccio had given Twana and Bieber airfare to the spaceport in Miami. He'd given her a credit marker with a seemingly endless expense account, although he had cautioned her that his bookmaker would diligently track her expenses. He'd made arrangements for her to pick up 2 tickets to travel via space bus off-world to the Colindrome for the Pan-galactic Prom Show. It had all happened so fast, so much food and luxury, so many of her dreams lying before her like a smorgasbord. And yet, all she could think about was her ma. DePeccio had come through on his end and enrolled her ma in the New Lives Rehab Counseling Center. Twana had said her goodbyes from the lush gardens outside the common building. She'd given her ma a hug and a kiss. Even then, her ma had barely registered Twana's presence. Twana could only hope that her ma would come out of New Lives a new woman. The lift's glass doors hissed open. Everybody moved out into the main terminal. A long hallway extended from the lift upward in a spiraling pattern to the hangar. Twana took Bieber's hand and led him out of the lift. If Twana felt overwhelmed, Bieber felt nearly incapacitated with the sensory overload. In legal cloning, doctors took snapshots of their patients' memories after finishing the procedure of printing biological tissue using identical genetic code. Doctors implanted actual memories into the clones, making them, for all intents and purposes, copies of their originators. In the case of Bieber, Pecio's doctors hadn't had a brain from which to copy memories, and so they had loaded the clone with basic motor skills, neutral emotions, the ability to communicate and comprehend solid and abstract thoughts. They gave him slightly less than average intelligence, all the better to manipulate him psychologically if needed. New Bieber was a clean slate, a canvas on which Twana could paint. New Bieber acted much like a child as he held Twana's hand and moved along the upward spiraling terminal. He seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings, every square inch of architecture. He shied away from people, cowering and meek.
It's gonna be okay,
Twana said.
I know this is all very new to you, but you're safe with me.
The two men dressed in business suits followed from a distance, obscured in the crowd. They kept their eyes on Twana and Bieber. The crowd wound their way up the walkway to the flight deck. It was an enormous chamber brimming with activity. Orange uniformed employees cut their way across the main thoroughfare, going about their various tasks. Light transport hover cars loaded with travelers who could afford to pay to be shuttled around the spaceport jockeyed through the sizzle of people. Flight crews dressed in jumpers and insignia moved with urgency, dragging overnight bags behind them toward their assigned space buses. Banks of seats, all fastened together, festooned the terminal. Spaceport guests sat waiting, reading, or listening to satellite transmissions through sensory implants. Twana looked up at the signs as she moved through the din of human and, in a few cases, alien activity. She finally found their gate, C4. She led Bieber through the throng of people and made her way to the check-in desk. She dealt with a woman dressed in hot orange behind the glass. The woman confirmed reservations for Twana and Bieber and handed them each a ticket chip to be scanned at boarding.
We have an hour. Why don't we find a place to sit down?
Twana said. Bieber nodded and settled in behind her. She led him to a bank of padded chairs. The two of them sat, Twana taking frequent glances at the clock as they waited to board. The two men in suits stayed in the background as they watched Twana and her partner sit and wait for their flight. After making sure Twana wasn't going anywhere, they walked to the check-in window. The woman behind the glass keyed in a few last strokes on a reservation terminal before looking up at them.
Can I help you, gentlemen?
She said. The shorter of the two men smiled. He took out a small wallet from his lapel and showed the woman an identity plate.
We're with the ETIA, ma'am.
The woman glanced both ways, then back up at the gentleman, holding out his identification. She liked his dark hair and blue eyes. And now she had discovered that his suit wasn't just a suit. It was a uniform. She liked a man in uniform.
I, of course, can't say too much. We have two persons of interest who we are currently observing here in your terminal. A young woman and her companion, male Caucasian, probably wearing a fedora, sunglasses, and a scarf.
Yes.
The woman said.
I just confirmed their flight. They're on...
She clicked a few keys and ran her finger down her monitor.
23701, to the Polydra system.
She covered her mouth with one of her hands, her nails exorbitantly done in hot orange and heavy accents. She gasped.
Oh dear, I wasn't supposed to give out that information.
The man with the dark hair and blue eyes smiled.
I assure you, it's quite all right. You've only prevented us from cutting up a lot of red tape. Can you please book us passage aboard 23701?
Let me check.
The woman clacked on her keyboard, then ran one of her elongated nails down the screen.
Oh dear.
What was that?
The man asked.
23701 is completely booked, and it's on platinum ticketing status.
What does that mean?
It means the passengers have booked their flights months, even years in advance. 23701 is one of our space buses headed for the Colindrome, for the Pan-galactic Prom Show.
Certainly you can get us on that flight. It's a matter of Earth security.
The blue-eyed man said.
I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. You could force the issue through official channels, I suppose.
She said.
But that would mean delaying the flight. Perhaps I could get you on a later space bus.
The woman clacked on the keyboard again, pulling up other possible reservations for the two gentlemen.
I could get you on the...
But when she looked up through the glass, the two gentlemen were gone. She smirked. She'd liked the short one. Neither Beatrice nor Lance Michaels had ever been off-world. They'd never even been in a spaceport. But 25 years before that day, on their first date, he had vowed that someday, perhaps long after they were married, they would make it to the Pan-galactic Prom Show. The event made headlines every year. It was touted as the premier party in the known galaxy. For nearly a century, the prom show, held at the majestic Colindrome, a space venue that spared nothing in flair and luxury, had hosted the who's who of intergalactic entertainers. Since Earth had made contact with alien races, entertainment, movies, fashion, and especially music, from off-world had made its way into Earth's pop culture. Earthlings were now listening to music from Polydrus, Beetlejuice, Terran X, and many other planets. This was the first year ever that an Earth band, Funk Toast, would headline the Pan-galactic Prom Show, a historical moment that Beatrice and Lance Michaels couldn't pass up. And so Lance, unbeknownst to his wife, had withdrawn enough credits to book passage to the Polydrus system nearly a year ago, and here they were, actually standing in an actual spaceport, waiting for an actual space bus that would actually carry them across the stars to the actual Pan-galactic Prom Show. The two of them gawked, beset with intrigue over the sights, the smells, the whole experience with rubbing elbows with such an eclectic group of Earth people and alien beings.
Excuse me,
Someone said from behind Beatrice and Lance. Both of them turned to see a pair of gentlemen smartly dressed, one short with blue eyes and dark hair, the other tall with slicked back blonde hair. Both gentlemen had kind demeanors. They struck Lance as businessmen, probably sophisticated with plenty of intragalactic flights under their belts. The shorter of the two men flashed an identification plate.
We're with the ETIA.
Lance looked at the badge. He'd never heard of the ETIA.
The Extraterrestrial Investigation Agency.
The short man clarified, probably reading the consternation on Lance's face.
I don't blame you for not knowing about us. It seems there are hundreds of acronymic apparatuses in the world government these days.
The short man smiled, instilled comfort in Lance. He chuckled.
We're conducting an investigation and are asking some of the passengers a few questions. We were wondering if we might have a few minutes of your time.
Sure, Lance said. Beatrice took his arm. Lance raised a hand in a calming gesture, nodded toward the two gentlemen.
Can you follow me, please?
The short man said. The two gentlemen led Lance and Beatrice down one of the many spur hallways that branched off from the main terminal. Near the end of the hall, the taller, blond man opened a door and let them into a staircase landing.
It's a wonder we even need an extraterrestrial investigation agency these days,
Lance said, a little chuckle in his voice.
Question is, especially wandering around this starport, is there actually an alien race that hasn't invaded Earth in one way or another?
Dear.
Beatrice said, cutting Lance off. Lance turned at the urgency in her voice. The two men wore hardened expressions as they put on rubber gloves, almost in synchronicity, like a choreographed move.
Say, what's going on here?
Lance said, moving protectively in front of his wife.
Just what kind of government apparatus do you guys represent?
The two men moved in, their gloved hands balled up into fists. Hal Jorgensen worked the launch pads as a loader. He aspired to become a space pilot, and after 20 years of loading luggage, he still hadn't lost that aspiration. He maneuvered a luggage vehicle along the hangar plate, weaving around mechanical diagnostic systems, spaceport personnel, and spacecraft of all sizes and capacities. He whistled an ancient tune from a bygone band that he had heard on the oldies station earlier that day, Lowrider. He couldn't seem to shake the tune from his mind. He pulled the luggage caddy up next to his space bus and turned his seat around so he could control the container lifts. He had less than an hour before the space bus left the terminal. It was headed to the Colindrome for the grandest show in the universe. Hal wished he was going. He wasn't really a Funk Toast fan, but with Bieber's death, the prom show had won tons of extra press. He'd seen clips from past prom shows on the feed. He'd found many of the females from the other planets strangely attractive. They looked nothing like humans. Some had horns, some had fur, some glowed in the dark. If it came down to it, Hal wouldn't mind settling down with some alien girl on a far-off world. If he ever had the means, he wouldn't hesitate to spring the sizable price for tickets and transport to the prom show. But not this year. The container lifts whined into service as the hefty hydraulic arms hoisted thousands of pounds of luggage up into the open loading bay in the belly of the space bus. Hal worked the controls expertly, still whistling the melody to Low Rider as he thumbed the joysticks, correcting for weight dispersion as he lifted the containers up into the hold. Hal didn't notice the man coming toward his loader. Nobody, neither security guard nor ground crew employee, had stopped the man from simply striding out into the loading area. He moved with conviction, as if he belonged, straight toward the luggage caddy. Before Hal even knew what hit him, the man opened the loading caddy's passenger side door and leapt into the cab. With 2 solid blows, the man knocked Hal unconscious. The man quickly stripped Hal of his uniform and propped him up in the back seat of the luggage caddy. Unlike Hal, the man had no experience working the joysticks. He took a moment to read the control labels, then progressed slowly, moving the luggage up into the belly of the space bus. The radio in the luggage caddy cracked to life.
Hal, what's going on? Why all the wobbling? You getting a sudden case of Parkinson's?
The man hesitated for a moment, then picked up the radio.
We need to get this loader serviced. It's handling like my grandma.
Well, just step on it or we're not going to make our launch time.
Copy that,
the man said. He concentrated on working the controls with more finesse. He raised the remaining luggage containers up into the hold, released the load, and lowered the hydraulic arms back to the deck. With the load in place, the man popped the hood of the luggage caddy, snatched up the radio handset, and leapt out of the cab. He wandered around to the front of the vehicle. Without thinking much about it, he tugged a few wires out of the electric motor and threw them into his pocket.
This thing is really on a fritz,
he said into the radio handset.
I can't get it to move. I'm gonna see if I can track down a mechanic.
Hal, you stay where you are. I'm going to send someone out to you.
The voice on the other side of the radio said, but the man had slipped away. The man trotted to the base of a maintenance ladder that led up into the hold of the space bus. He glanced both ways. The pad crawled with ground crew, mechanics, machine operators, ground marshals. The man mounted the ladder and climbed up into the hold. Once inside, he found a dark corner where he could hunker down. He crouched into a nook between 2 enormous cargo containers. He would stay there until the space bus had left port. Then he would find somewhere more comfortable to sleep. Pan-galactic Prom Show fans stood in line, waiting for a faceless announcer to call them out onto the space pad to board. An anticipatory exhilaration sparked in the group. This was the first year an Earth band had been booked for the prom show. Some of the fans, those who'd purchased their tickets when Bieber was slated to headline, looked disappointed, in mourning over their pop idol's assassination. The prom show producer, Slink Arrowheart, had bumped Funk Toast, the opening act, to the headliner position, but tickets to the prom show were still hard to come by. Bieber or no Bieber, a throng of anxious fans would make sure to be on the dance floor when the music started pumping. None of the hardcore Bieber fans noticed Twana or her companion. Bieber was dead. Although Twana's companion was the spitting image of the teen pop star, no one paid him any notice. An announcer's voice came over the spaceport's tinny PA system.
The Greater Keys Spaceport welcomes passengers of Space Bus 23701. Please report to the loading bay with your admissions chips. Boarding will commence in 60 seconds.
Passengers of 23701 moved to the lighted entrance gate and queued up. Less than a minute later, the doors hissed open. Spaceport employees began scanning passengers' ticket chips. Twana and Bieber made their way forward in the crawling line. It almost didn't seem real to her as she handed her admission chips over that she was actually going to fly off-world. The conductor scanned both chips and waved them through. Twana felt her heart leap as they made their way along the platform into the space bus. The spaceport conductors paid no notice as they scanned admission chips from the remaining passengers, including 2 men dressed in business suits. space bus, the observation-styled passenger decks filled up with travelers. Tourists and business passengers sat down and allowed the seat restraints to lower over their bodies. It was all wide eyes and anticipation as the space bus airlocks hissed shut. The captain said a few words as the space bus rose from the pad and hovered to one of the many pneumatic doors on the ceiling of the hangar. He said something about the Pan-galactic Prom Show, about this year's event being historically significant for Earth. He said something apologetic to those on board who might be Bieber fans. Twana heard none of it. She watched the pneumatic hangar doors open wide. The space bus moved through them and up into the sky. Within minutes, the craft made its way out of Earth's atmosphere and cut into inky space. Twana had never seen stars so bright. Earth looked beautiful and surreal far below, enormous and blue, streaked with white paintbrush clouds. The captain came over the PA and announced that he was about to engage the space bus into superluminal speed and for passengers to ensure that the restraints were fastened. The countdown commenced. When the counting voice reached 0, an odd tingle rose in Twana's stomach. She watched the stars all around turn into shooting lines across space. She never dreamed she would travel off-world, much less to attend the Pan-galactic Prom Show, much less accompanied by Bieber himself. She felt almost giddy with delight. She couldn't help but smile. Unbeknownst to Twana, two men, one short with dark hair and blue eyes, the other tall with slicked-back blonde hair, sat near the back of the passenger deck, both of them keeping their eyes on her and on her companion. Once the ship hit open space and the captain engaged artificial gravity, he came over the PA system and granted the passengers permission to move about the bus. Twana unsnapped her restraints and raised its cage-like apparatus on its retracting line. She felt woozy as she stood. The gravity system didn't exactly emulate Earth's pull. She would have to get used to the subtle oscillations. Bieber sat restrained, watching everyone else in the observation deck get out of their seats. By the looks on their faces, they shared the same lack of command over gravity. One woman actually collapsed. Her husband helped her to her feet.
It's time to get you out of your restraints,
Twana said to Bieber. He looked up at her, a perplexed expression on his face. He reminded Twana so much of a child. She smiled as she leaned over to help him release his buckles. He took her hands and allowed her to help him up. He woozed, rocking on his feet. He put one hand on his stomach and grimaced.
Don't lose your cookies.
Twana looked around at the other dipping passengers.
You might just cause a vomit chain reaction.
Bieber nodded and took a moment to regain a form of firmness in his legs.
Tell you what,
Twana said.
Let's get to our sleeper cabin. I'll order you something to eat and you'll feel better.
Twana led Bieber out of the observation deck into a long, pristine hallway. The vastness of the space bus nearly overwhelmed her. She played at competence as she followed the map grids posted at every intersection. With only a few missed turns and corrections, she made her way to the sleeper cabin. She used a key chip to unlock the door and led Bieber inside. The room wasn't enormous, but it was adequate. DePescio hadn't sprung for VIP tickets, so there was no observation window. It was just a functional room, narrow with two bunks, one on top of the other. The linens smelled crisp. A pot of artificial flowers rested on a credenza fastened to the wall. Two banks of drawers were fixed into the wall itself, one for her, one for Bieber. This would be their home for the next 6 weeks as the space bus made its way into the Polydra system. Twana pushed a little button on the bottom of a comm pad fixed to the wall.
Hello, is anybody there?
The comm pad came to life with a congenial voice.
Greetings from Intertran. How may we assist you?
Twana smiled over her shoulder at Bieber. He shrugged.
We're hoping to get some food and drinks,
Twana said.
Certainly. You'll find a menu in the courtesy compartment. I'll stand by for your order.
Twana found a narrow drawer fixed beneath the comm pad. She pushed a button to release it and pulled it open. Inside, she found an envelope that contained several documents, many of them brochures with photographs and information that outlined a host of activities one could engage in during flight time. There was dancing, gambling, karaoke, food, games, rock climbing, nearly every activity Twana could imagine. A thrill of excitement crawled up her in the prospect of sharing so much time with Bieber. She found a menu in the drawer and looked it over. She hadn't imagined she would ever get to try the kinds of cuisine listed, everything from grilled cheese sandwiches to exotic dishes from off-Earth. She chose pizza. She put in her order and ended the call. With food on the way, she turned her attention to Bieber. Since making the deal with DiPescio, things had moved so quickly that she hadn't had a moment to get to know him. He'd been assigned to her just hours before departure, and she'd been accompanied by one of DiPescio's goons right up until she had entered the spaceport. Her heart fluttered as she looked him over. He was everything she could have ever dreamed of. She walked to him and pushed up to her toes. She removed his glasses and hat. She spent a minute running her fingers through his hair, tossing it this way and that, till she had roughly emulated his signature hairstyle. Bieber stood still and watched her. Twana stepped back, folded her arms, and inspected him.
You're his spitting image.
Whose spitting image?
Bieber asked. Twana laughed. She moved over to her carry-on and rummaged through it until she came out with an oversized scrapbook. She plopped it on the bottom bunk. Bieber looked over her shoulder at the book, a thick volume, black, except for a big pink kiss Twana had painted on the imitation leather.
You are Bieber,
Twana said.
At least we have to make you into Bieber. The heart of every teenage girl on Earth depends on it.
Twana opened the book and introduced Bieber to himself. The scrapbook was thronged with photographs, torn-out journal pages, love letters, drawings, doodles, concert ticket stubs, articles from teen heartthrob magazines, everything Twana had collected about her idol.
You're a megastar. You have sold over 10 million records and toured the world again and again.
Bieber's brow furrowed as he looked at the photographs.
I don't remember.
Twana drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly.
That's because you're not exactly Bieber, at least not yet. But you were created from his DNA.
I'm a copy?
He asked. Twana frowned as she looked into his eyes and saw nothing but confusion.
Yes, you're a copy. For now. With a little work, can make you into the real deal.
But why make a copy of something that already exists?
Twana took a moment to craft her next words. How could she tell him that his DNA donor had been murdered? She decided the truth would be best, as early as possible. That way the air would be clear and they could discuss their situation freely. Twana flipped forward to nearly the end of her scrapbook. She opened it to a spread of photographs. Bieber's charred-out limousine, sobbing fans, some of them injured by the blast, policemen cordoning off the crime scene with plastic police line, candlelight vigils, fan art and love letters taped to the fence outside the last venue Bieber had ever played.
Someone assassinated you. You were killed just after playing a concert. I was there.
Bieber gasped as he looked over the photos. He covered his mouth with one hand. His eyes widened.
Who killed me?
Twana flipped the page to reveal a photograph of Brennan Nix standing in front of a concrete wall holding a number pad, one eye half closed, a look of utter contempt in his face.
It was that evil Brennan Nix, a member of your old band Five Fingers, who killed you. I wasn't really a Five Fingers fan, to tell you the truth. I don't feel like you truly bloomed as an artist until you struck out on your own.
Will Nix come after me again?
Bieber said. Twana broke out laughing.
Are you kidding? This is his mugshot. Nix is in jail and he'll probably be there for the rest of his life. You don't need to worry about Brennan Nix. Besides, he thinks you're dead.
Twana looked up from her scrapbook and smiled.
Imagine what he will think when he learns that you're alive.
Bieber breathed a sigh of relief.
Anyway,
Twana said, snapping the scrapbook closed.
It's my job to make you into Bieber, and we only have 6 weeks to do it.
She gestured for him to stand up. As he rose from the bed, she put her hands on her hips. She walked around him, nodding her approval as she looked him over.
Everything seems to be in place. You look perfect. Can I see your left hand?
Bieber offered his hand to her. Twana spread his middle and ring fingers apart. There it was, the trademark birthmark, right there on his ring finger, shaped like a heart. DePeccio's biologists had seen to every detail. She dropped his hand and stepped back.
Okay, first things first. Can you sing?
Sing?
Bieber arched his eyebrows.
Yeah, sing. You're a teen pop star. Try this.
Twana sang a couple of lines from Bieber's mega hit, Stand. She had a better-than-average voice, having taken choir for 2 years in junior high school. She'd even fantasized about singing backup for Bieber. Now she might actually get the chance. Bieber took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on Twana. He opened his mouth and sang. The phrases came out as graceless whines. He sounded like he was singing solely through his nose. Twana winced. This was going to be more difficult than she thought. She covered her ears and frowned. Bieber caught the hint and clopped his mouth shut. He looked at the floor, dejected.
Look, don't be discouraged.
Twana said.
I'm gonna whip you into shape.
She circled him.
How about dancing? Do you have any moves?
I don't know,
Bieber said.
Why don't you try the funky monkey? It's one of Bieber's signatures.
What is a funky monkey?
Twana sighed and rolled her eyes. She moved to the middle of the room.
Put your hands up like this.
She put her hands up, palms out, kept her eyes on him.
It's all in the hips and the shoulders. There's a little kick to it, like this.
Twana began to dance the funky monkey, gyrating her hips and swiveling back and forth. She even used the little head turn that Bieber had adopted in his later shows. After a few rounds of the dance move, she stopped.
Well, give it a try.
Bieber raised his hands and opened his palms in the same manner Twana had demonstrated. He bit his bottom lip, then went into his version of the funky monkey. His feet clomped down like he was wearing gum boots. His swivel didn't sync with his shoulder swing, and his hands flapped instead of arching across his body. Twana sat down on the bed as she watched Bieber wreck the dance move of his own creation. What had she gotten herself into? Someone knocked on the door. Bieber stopped dancing and sat down on the bottom bunk, panting for breath. Twana answered the door. An orderly stood in the hall holding a pizza. She thanked him and took the pizza. She opened the flat box and sat down on the bed, placing the pizza between them. They ate in silence. He seemed to like the pizza because he was on his third slice before she found the will to speak up.
We have a long way to go,
Twana said.
There's something fiercely important that I have to tell you.
Bieber went on eating.
We have to be careful. Virtually every teenage girl knows who you are. The fact is, most of them probably have Bieber books just like mine.
Twana placed a hand on her scrapbook.
You can't be recognized. We have to make sure you always wear your disguise. And should someone come up to you and say, "Hey, you're Bieber," I want you to say only one thing.
What's that?
Bieber asked between swallows.
I want you to say, "I hate that guy." Got it?
I got it.
Fine. Let's practice. I'm some bimbo on the observation deck. You've just come in to take a look at the stars. You're standing at the window. I come bouncing up to you and say, "Hey, I've been watching you all day. You're Bieber, right?"
I hate that guy,
Bieber said.
Good. Now finish your pizza, and let's go exploring.
Space Trooper!
Today's song, Space Trooper, holds a special place in my heart. Like the other tracks so far for this season, I wrote this one as part of a promotional album for the board game Chops. You can pick it up in my store at craignibo.com. I created it as if performed by a fictional band called Starlight Reactor, who appear in the game itself. And I must add, for a bass player, disco is a blast to lay down. Once again, the song is called Space Trooper. Thank you for joining me on the Terrifying Lies podcast. Each time you tune in, I'm grateful. I hope you're enjoying this epic space story as much as I enjoyed writing it. Believe me, the best is yet to come. Until next time, I bid you sweet dreams, or should I say, sweet nightmares.
This has been the Terrifying Lies podcast. Please, come again. You're welcome here.